here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm going to throw this out real quick because it'll get awkward if I don't, but I'm pretty much deaf. So I'll do a lot of this if there's something directly asked because I can't hear you. And it's not you, it's me. And this is Goodwill. And I'll talk about Goodwill in a second. But first of all, it's an amazing honor to actually come into a high school that sat down and took the time to study the things that we talk about in our film and the other films that you guys watched. It's really, as a filmmaker, it's touching, but as a former teacher, it's amazing. Because the reality of it is that what we do is strictly about education. We're not making films that are social issues. We're not making films that are adversarial. We're making films that are about issues that are related to each and every individual person, no matter how you feel about them. So, Fragile Waters is kind of an interesting thing. You'll notice that the name itself is Fragile Waters, not fragile orcas, not fragile salmon. It centers on the water, and that's the center point for the film. Always comes back to water. You'll also notice, thematically speaking, water comes into the film over and over again. Even when it's not the ocean, even when it's not the rivers and streams, you'll see water, you see rain, you see droplets, and that's just kind of a subliminal message to keep bringing you back to it. All of you have seen the film, yes? Okay. That's good. Because one of the things that is hard in filmmaking is deciding what to put in a film. And we had, at the end of filming, we had 400 hours of raw footage, which we had to condense down into an hour, which we further condensed down into 51 minutes, but we'll talk about that later. To do that means that we took 17 interviews and decided what needed to stay and what needed to go. And we actually did that more than once, and now I'll explain that. The original version of the film was longer than what you saw. It was 57.8 minutes, and it actually included a person, one other interview that got completely removed from the film. Not because the person said anything that wasn't great or interesting, but it didn't fit in the film anymore because he talked about plankton. And plankton is the building block for the food web. And the thing about plankton that we found interesting, the reason we sought this scientist out is because he was studying plankton in the area where the whales and the Chinook salmon were epicentered in the Salish Sea in the Puget Sound. So we went to him, we spent a whole day with him. It was amazing. The footage was really neat laboratory setup. It looked like this science fiction laboratory, with all these neon lights and tubes and bubbles, and it was really cool. We had to cut the whole thing out because it no longer fit the story once we edited it down from 400 hours to 58 minutes at that point. What ended up happening is we went to the Friday Harbor Film Fest to premiere the film on November 7th, and when we showed the original longer version of the film, and people liked it. It was well received. But the only reoccurring comment was, it's a bit too long. So we had to go in and make some cuts. And that wasn't the only thing. We cut out some other amazing people from British Columbia, Washington, cut out a marine biologist down in Monterey, California. And I would love to have had that whole story. But you have a trade-off between keeping people's attention and telling a 4-hour complete story. And I don't think anybody's going to sit there with a 4-hour version of Fragile Waters. What we ended up with, though, we're very proud of because it tells a very multi-pronged, multifaceted story about a series of issues and not just a singularity. And one of those things is that and I'm sure you've talked about it in your classes, is that the salmon populations are decimated. There's a statistic that gets put out there, and it might have even been in the film, it's very brief. It's amazing, and it's so damaging when you think about it. But today's wild Chinook populations are 10% of their historical numbers. And that's the historical record based off of record keeping from the early 20th century. So that we're not talking about pre-industrialization. We're talking about when they were already decimated. We're at 10% of these highly reduced numbers. Ken Balcom, who's one of the scientists that you see in the film, says that wild salmon will likely be extinct within the next 70 years. That's a fact, unless things change drastically, rapidly. I'm going to talk about change for a second, because a lot of people, every time we have a screening, the first question we get is, what can I do about it? Well, there's a million answers, but the main one is, after watching the film, seek out more information. You folks live on a beautiful river system, and it's a salmon-bearing system. It is in your own backyard. I would start there. That's a fact. You know, that's what I say to every venue we go to, whether it's California, Victoria, Bellingham, whatever. We've always said start at home. But the other part of it is share the film. We're not making money off of this. We will never charge people to see our film. We don't get paid. We never got paid. We only want for the film to reach people. And the more people it reaches, the more conversations get started. As that happens, action gets started. On the heels of us first presenting our film, people that were in the audience in Friday Harbor created an online initiative to go in front of the government in Washington State and to have immediate action taken on behalf of the Chinook salmon. This was in response to a movie we made. And that's the kind of thing that can happen over and over again if people get out there and tell the story. I'm not going to get preachy about it now. Actually, I want to talk to you a little bit about Goodwill. Goodwill is a little stuffed orca that came from a thrift store called Goodwill. And the reason I bought him is because I was doing a presentation in Victoria where I was talking about whales as commodities and a historical perspective of how whales became endangered. There are very few animals that have gone extinct or are endangered today that did not become extinct or endangered because of human actions. Let that sink in for a minute, because we actually haven't been around that long in modern form. And in post-industrial form, we've only been around for 200 years. And in the past 200 years, the rate of extinction has more than increased tenfold. Goodwill is representative of one of the problems with whales. See, whales, nobody cared about whales, except for bands of people that lived in areas that were commonly close to whales that would pass by in the waters. So indigenous people, and Shary's actually a member of First Nations from the British Columbian Skichitsin band. And these folks took whales, seals, salmon for sustenance, for to live on. Subsistence whaling did not endanger whales. It still does not endanger whales. If you take a total of 20 whales a year, whales are going to be okay. I'm not saying I'm advocating hunting whales, but the point is subsistence whaling wasn't a problem. But starting about the 1600s, whales became useful in other ways. And one of those ways is the fact that businesses, after the exploration kicked off of the New World, which was not really a new world because millions of people were already living here, but after that exploration kicked off, international commerce kicked off because sailing technology changed, navigation technology changed. Overnight, drastically, it was like landing a man on the moon for them. So what happened is commodities had to move back and forth between North America and Europe, Asia and North America. To do this and to keep up with the record keeping, the accounting, the mercantile, the stocking of ships and provisions, getting them ready, people had to work later hours. What ended up happening is they ran into problems because they were using a lighting system that relied heavily on taro and other things that were very smoky. If you can imagine, no electric lights, and the only things you had were lanterns that created smoke. After about an hour of being in a smoky room, nobody wants to work. So work days were actually condensed down to sun up to sundown, which with the new expansion of international commerce really made it difficult for people to make as much money as they wanted to make. So they needed something else. And in Spain, in the Basque area of Spain, they already had the solution: whale oil. Whale oil actually burns smokeless. So in the late 1600s, they decided to start commercial whaling sperm whales for the oil society called spermaceti, which is smokeless, and huge reservoirs of the smokeless oil in each one of these sperm whales. They're pretty cool stuff, except it also spurred on something new, which was the Industrial Revolution, because now people could work longer hours, which led to factory work. And factory work led to mechanical inventions. Those mechanical inventions became factory machines. Factory machines had one problem, though. The longer they ran, the quicker they broke. If you take two gears and you stick them together and you run them without doing anything else to them, and you keep spinning them against each other, they're going to seize up because of something called friction and heat expansion. And they're going to break. If you ever want to try this out, take all the oil out of your car and take a 200-mile drive and see what happens. No, don't. Your car will be ruined. Your engine will be ruined. That's the reason your car has oil in it. And what they needed now is they needed a lubricant to keep these big machines rolling. And that lubricant came, well, not from orcas, but it came from sperm whales. It was the go-to. It was Walmart of the 1700s. They could get meat. They could get bones for corsets, which was a beauty material. They could get the raw materials for lighting oils, for lubricant. It was the coolest stuff ever. Not for the sperm whales, though. By 1800, they were taking about 40,000 sperm whales a year. That sounds like a pretty huge number, and it is, but we're going to jump into a much bigger number in a second. The whales got a reprieve because something else happened in the 1800s in Pennsylvania. They discovered something in the ground that was black and gooey and also worked like a lubricant, and that was oil. And they started to figure out that, hey, this is, first of all, more cost effective for us to extract than going out and trying to hunting sperm whales, and less dangerous. Whaling was a dangerous life. If you were on a whaling boat and you spent 12 years on a whaling boat, you, first of all, statistically speaking, you were missing digits of your hand, fingers that got cut off from ropes and doing things, or an arm or a leg, you know, the old pirate cliche, the peg leg. Well, that wasn't mostly pirates. Those were whalers that lost their legs and limbs because it was a very dangerous industry. So they were very glad to shut that down. And it actually did drop down to only 10,000 sperm whales a year. And oil took over, and that was really cool. Up until the 1930s and the rise of World War II, which began in the 30s in other countries, in the 40s in this country. Post-World War II, sperm whaling jumped from what had been about 10,000 whales a year to 250,000 whales a year, stayed at that rate for 15 years. More than 3 million whales were removed, sperm whales alone were removed in the 20th century. And that's because sperm whales were, again, the go-to source of lubrication to rebuild the war-torn, destroyed countries post-World War II that did not have easy access to petroleum oil. It doomed them. Sperm whales are still not recovered. There are sections of the world where sperm whales used to be so abundant that sailors could see them on all sides of their boats as they crossed the ocean in the Pacific, that now they see tons of stuff, but it's not whales, it's just plastic and garbage, because those sperm whales are gone. all cetaceans have different ecotypes. The ecotypes of sperm whales that went extinct will never come back. Never come back, and that's human related. International ban on whaling in the 1970s kicked in. We're back down to maybe legally taking a handful of sperm whales in the Malaysian countries and Indonesia, but there's still whaling going on with other whales. Countries like Japan, Norway, Iceland, Canada does commercial whaling. So it's very, very interesting that even though there's not a commercial demand anymore for the byproducts of whales, there's still a demand for the commodity of whales. So Beanie Babies, how does the Beanie Baby relate to this? And that's a sad thing. It's an exact relation. I'm going to digress for a second, tell you guys a story about my mom. And I love my mom, I'm not picking on her, but she did something a little weird. She owned a shop, I'm from Orlando, Florida, and she owned a shop in Orlando that had import goods. You know, she sold stuff from Europe. And she was doing pretty good. And I was over in Europe backpacking with a friend for about a year. And I got a call from my mom, and she said, "Do you know what a Beanie Baby is?" I had no clue. I was assuming it was a toy, right? And she explained it to me. There were these little stuffed bears, and each one of those bears were limited editions. And on the bears that she was really interested in were little flags, and you could only get them at that time in the country where the flag originated from. So she wanted me, I was in Germany at the time, she wanted me to find the Beanie Babies that had a German flag on it. So okay, cool. And I found them. They were about $5 a piece. I picked up about 4 or 5 of them, threw them in the mail. She sold each one for $100. I was like, do what? Because this right here costs maybe 15 cents to make in the United States. Overseas, maybe a nickel, and $5 is a ripoff. So $100 seemed like a lot of money, and it was. And by 1997, Beanie Babies were so overvalued that there was a camel that came out that had a misprint on it. His name was Humphreys, and he got put on eBay, and he sold for $7,000 for a $5 Beanie Baby. Whales are a lot like that. The supply and demand correlation between whales and what their uses are directly linked. Today, commercial whaling is not in high demand. But thousands of dolphins and orcas and belugas and right whales are taken, or not right whales, pilot whales are taken for the captive entertainment industry. They're the new Beanie Babies. Nobody cared about the value of an orca in 1950. If you would have called somebody up and said, "Hey, I caught an orca," they'd be like, "Let it go," because there's no use for it. But in the late 1960s, that changed. And if you saw the beginning of the film, it killed, decimated the southern resident population. We ended up losing, at the time there was an estimated population of 120, we ended up losing more than 40 of them to the captive entertainment industry. They were the youngest, and they were mostly females. And the reason why the southern residents are in danger today comes from that moment in time when the orcas became Beanie Babies. And that's a sad thing in my opinion. And you're entitled to digest that and think about it, but in a rational sense, it makes no sense. Because we're creating a commodity out of bringing a live, sentient being into captivity and showing them off, and then charging people $100 a piece to go see that and buy little stuffed orcas. I am proud to say though, Goodwill had a tag on them. The tag was a Beanie Baby tag, and it was also endorsed by SeaWorld, and I cut that tag off and I freed him. But Goodwill stays with us because he wants to see the world and we're traveling around, so he hangs out with us. But he's free to go wherever he wants to. That's the history of it. That's where we got to the point that we're at now with whaling and whales being endangered. There are very few animals that are endangered today because of natural impacts. The bulk of them are human impacts. It's just something to keep in mind when you think about this, and you think about the films that you watched, including our film. I'm going to jump into our film real quick because we're kind of fond of it. And it's truly a labor of love. We spent a year filming it. We spent 3 months editing it, which is a very condensed time frame. But we did that because the story had to come out, and it had to come out very quickly. We don't have time to waste. I can't overstate it. It was in the film. There's a window of opportunity, but each day that goes by, that window of opportunity gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You could be the generation that sees them go extinct, or you could be the generation that sees and helps save them. It's a choice that we have right now. And that's kind of why we did this. Shary has a child. I have 2 kids. They deserve the right to have a world that has the southern residents in them. Because southern residents aren't just orcas. Orcas are really cool. Orcas are the most geographically spread marine mammals in the world. You can find orcas in every ocean. The Indian Ocean has orcas, the Bahamas has orcas, Hawaii has orcas, South America, Antarctica, the Arctic, European waters, Mediterranean Sea, they all have orcas. That's a pretty amazing thing. The total population of orcas, all the ecotypes combined, is estimated between 50 and 75,000. So that's still a lot of orcas. But, and I'm going to make him an honorary southern resident because we don't know where it came from. But these guys